The tears streaming down Daphne Fletcher's face caught the afternoon sunlight as she sat on her trunk at the dusty Salida train station, her small form nearly lost among the bustle of arriving passengers reuniting with their loved ones. Colorado Territory, 1876, a place and time that had promised her a new beginning, yet now seemed to mock her with its vastness and unfamiliarity. The sun beat down relentlessly on the wooden platform, the thin shade offered by the station's overhang doing little to protect her fair skin. She'd been waiting for nearly 3 hours, her letter clutched in one gloved hand, her handkerchief dampened with tears in the other. "Last call for luggage from the Denver line," shouted the porter, his voice carrying across the now nearly empty platform. Daphne's shoulders shook as she tried to contain her sobs. The station master had already given her pitying glances twice, and she couldn't bear a third. Her uncle had promised to meet her, had encouraged her to make the journey west after her parents' deaths had left her alone in Boston. But now she sat abandoned, funds depleted by the journey, with no idea where her uncle's ranch might be located beyond the vague directions in his letters. The platform had cleared of all but a few stragglers when she felt rather than saw a shadow fall across her. Looking up through tear-blurred eyes, Daphne saw a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. "Excuse me, miss," came a deep voice, gentle despite its roughness. "Might you be Miss Fletcher?" She nodded mutely, too overcome to speak. The man stepped forward into her line of sight, broad-shouldered, dust on his boots, a worn Stetson pushed back on his head. His face was tanned by the sun, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. "I'm Isaac Xavier," he said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully before him. "Your Uncle Robert sent me to fetch you. There was trouble at the ranch, nothing for you to worry about, but he couldn't get away." He paused, noticing her tear-stained face. "I apologize for being late. Trail got washed out about 10 miles back and I had to find another way around." She was crying because no one came to meet her. The cowboy stepped forward and said, "I'm here now." Those simple words, "I'm here now," caused fresh tears to fall down Daphne's cheeks, but these were tears of relief. She hastily dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, embarrassed by her emotional display. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," she managed, attempting to compose herself. "I feared I had been forgotten." Isaac's weathered face softened. "No one's forgotten you, Miss Fletcher. Your uncle's been talking about your arrival for weeks." He reached for her trunk. "Let's get you to the ranch. It's a fair ride and we should start if we want to make it before dark." Daphne stood, smoothing her travel-worn skirts. "I've never ridden a horse, Mr. Xavier," she admitted, looking apprehensively at the 2 horses tethered nearby, one a sturdy chestnut, the other a dappled gray. Isaac's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "The gray mare is gentle as can be. But if you prefer, you can ride with me until you're comfortable on your own." His eyes, she noticed now, were a clear blue that reminded her of the Massachusetts sky in autumn. "I believe I would prefer that arrangement, at least until we are beyond the town," Daphne said, drawing herself up with as much dignity as she could muster after her emotional display. Isaac nodded, lifting her trunk with ease and securing it to the back of his saddle. "Do you have other bags?" "Just this," she said, indicating a carpet bag at her feet. He tied that alongside her trunk, then turned to offer her his hand. "May I?" She placed her gloved hand in his, feeling the strength beneath the leather of his work gloves. With surprising gentleness, Isaac helped her onto his chestnut, then mounted behind her. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed, his voice close to her ear. "I won't let you fall." The ride out of Salida was a revelation for Daphne. Having spent her 22 years in Boston's confines, the vastness of the Colorado landscape overwhelmed her. Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June heat in the valley. "It's beautiful," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles. "That it is," Isaac agreed. "Different from the East, I imagine. Very different. Everything seems so boundless." Isaac guided the horses onto a trail leading away from town. "Your uncle's ranch is about 15 miles northeast of Salida. Good land with a creek running through it. He's built up a decent herd over the last 5 years." "I know so little about him," Daphne admitted. "He and my father corresponded, but they hadn't seen each other since before I was born." "Robert's a good man," Isaac said simply. "Fair to his hands, generous to folks in need. You'll be well looked after." As they rode, Daphne became increasingly aware of the man behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the secure strength of the arm that occasionally steadied her when the trail grew rough. Despite her initial trepidation, she found herself relaxing into the journey. "May I ask what brought you to work for my uncle, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from their proximity. There was a slight pause before he answered. "I came west after the war. Didn't have much waiting for me back in Tennessee. Worked my way around the territory for a few years, then signed on with your uncle about 3 years back." The mention of the war made Daphne curious about his age. He seemed perhaps 10 years her senior, which would have made him young during the conflict, but not too young to fight. "Your uncle gave me a chance when others might not have," Isaac continued, his tone suggesting there was more to the story than he was sharing. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a bird the only sounds breaking the quiet of the trail. "The washout you mentioned," Daphne said eventually. "Was it caused by recent rains?" "Yes, madam. Had a gully washer 3 days back. Creek rose fast, took out part of the lower trail. That's why I couldn't get to town earlier. Had to backtrack and come around the North Ridge." The explanation eased some of Daphne's lingering hurt about being left waiting. "I'm grateful you made the effort, Mr. Xavier." "Isaac," he said. "Most folks just call me Isaac." "Then I shall as well," she replied, "though I expect you should continue to address me as Miss Fletcher, at least until we are better acquainted." A low chuckle rumbled through his chest. "As you wish, Miss Fletcher." The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when they crested a rise and Isaac reined in the horses. "There it is," he said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Fletcher's Reach." The ranch spread before them, a sturdy main house built of logs with a stone chimney, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where cattle and horses grazed. Smoke curled from the chimney, and even from this distance, Daphne could see figures moving about the yard. "It's larger than I expected," she admitted. "Your uncle's done well for himself. Started with barely anything, built it up acre by acre." As they approached the ranch, a man emerged from the main house, tall and broad-shouldered like Isaac, but with gray streaking his beard. He strode toward them, his face breaking into a wide smile. "There she is," he called out. "My brother's girl." Isaac dismounted first, then reached up to help Daphne down. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she was grateful for his support as her feet touched the ground. Robert Fletcher enveloped her in a bear hug before she could properly greet him. "You look just like your mother," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Got her eyes, exact same shade of green." Daphne felt tears threatening again. "Thank you for having me, Uncle Robert." "This is your home now," he said firmly, releasing her but keeping his hands on her shoulders. "I'm sorry I couldn't come fetch you myself. Had a situation with some rustlers that needed handling." Mr. Xavier explained, Daphne assured him. "He was most attentive on the journey." Robert clapped Isaac on the shoulder. Best foreman a man could ask for. Knew I could count on him to bring you safe. He turned back to Daphne. Let's get you settled. Must be exhausted after that trip. Martha's got supper nearly ready and she's fixed up the east room for you. Isaac was already unloading her trunk and carpet bag. I'll bring these in, sir. Thank you, Isaac, Robert said, then guided Daphne toward the house. Martha's our cook and housekeeper, he explained. Been with me since I started this place. Bit gruff, but heart of gold. She's been in a tizzy getting everything ready for you. The house was simple but comfortable. The main room dominated by a large stone fireplace and furnished with sturdy, handcrafted pieces. A plump woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun emerged from what Daphne assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "So this is the niece," Martha said, her tone brusque but her eyes kind as they took in Daphne's travel-worn appearance. "Your skin and bones, child." "Don't they feed you back east, Martha?" Robert admonished gently. The woman waved him off. "Go on, show her to her room. Supper's in half an hour. Plenty of time for her to wash up." Isaac entered with Daphne's trunk, and Robert led them down a short hallway to a room at the rear of the house. It was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a washstand. But someone, Martha, presumably had placed a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, and the bed was covered with a colorful quilt. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," Robert said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "It's lovely," Daphne assured him, genuinely touched by the effort to make her feel welcome. Isaac set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "I'll leave you to settle in, Miss Fletcher," he said, giving her a nod before turning to Robert. "I'll check on that south fence line before dark, sir." "Thank you, Isaac," Robert replied. "Join us for supper when you get back." After Isaac left, Robert lingered awkwardly. "I know it's not what you're accustomed to in Boston, Daphne, and I know we're strangers to each other, but I want you to know that this is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Daphne felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Uncle Robert, after losing mother and father. I didn't know what would become of me." "Well, now you do. You're a Fletcher, and Fletchers look after their own." He patted her shoulder somewhat awkwardly. "Rest a bit before supper. The journey from Boston's no small thing." Left alone, Daphne sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. From the despair she'd felt at the train station to the unexpected appearance of Isaac Xavier, to the warm welcome from an uncle she barely knew, it was almost too much to process. She moved to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the basin to wash her face and hands. As she dried her face on the rough but clean towel provided, she gazed out the window at the ranch spread before her. In the distance, she could see Isaac riding toward the south, his figure straight and sure in the saddle. "I'm here now," he had said. Such simple words, but they had been exactly what she needed to hear in that moment of abandonment. Daphne changed her travel-stained dress for a simpler cotton one, suitable for a ranch supper. As she pinned her hair back up, she found herself wondering about Isaac Xavier, the quiet foreman who had come to her rescue. There was a story there, she was certain. Something in his eyes spoke of experiences beyond what he had shared. The supper bell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to face her new life at Fletcher's Reach. Supper was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Martha fussed over Daphne, insisting she take second helpings of everything. Robert kept the conversation flowing with tales of the ranch's early days and questions about Daphne's journey west. Isaac joined them just as they were starting on the peaches, his shirt and face freshly washed, though nothing could quite remove the trail dust ground into his work clothes. "South fence is holding," he reported to Robert as he took his seat. Found tracks, though, same as before. A shadow crossed Robert's face. We'll discuss it later. Daphne noted the exchange but didn't inquire. She was a guest here, still learning the rhythms and concerns of ranch life. After supper, Robert showed Daphne around the main house, explaining how he'd built it himself, adding rooms as the ranch prospered. Started with just the main room and kitchen, he told her. Added the bedrooms 3 years back. Been meaning to put in a proper parlor for entertaining, but there's always more pressing matters. It's a wonderful home, Daphne said sincerely. I can see the care that went into building it. Later, as Daphne prepared for bed, she heard low voices from the main room, Robert and Isaac discussing something in serious tones. She caught fragments about rustlers and North Range before their voices dropped too low to distinguish words. Sleep came quickly that night, her body exhausted from the journey and her mind full of new impressions. Her last thought before drifting off was of Isaac's blue eyes and the gentle way he had said, "I'm here now." The following days brought a crash course in ranch life for Daphne. Martha took her under wing, teaching her to cook on the wood-burning stove and showing her how to manage the household tasks that were so different from city living. "No sense in you sitting around like some fine lady," Martha declared. "Every woman on a ranch pulls her weight." Daphne didn't mind. The work kept her mind occupied and helped her feel less like an intruder in this new world. She learned to make soap, to preserve vegetables from Martha's kitchen garden, and even to milk the 2 dairy cows that provided for the ranch's needs. Robert proved to be a kind if somewhat reserved guardian. He clearly had little experience dealing with a young woman, but he made efforts to make her feel welcome, bringing her wildflowers he'd spotted on his rides, and taking time each evening to tell her stories about her father's and his childhood. And then there was Isaac. The ranch foreman kept a respectful distance, but Daphne often felt his eyes on her as she went about her new duties. Occasionally, their paths would cross in the barn when she went to collect eggs, or in the yard as he returned from checking the herds. He was unfailingly polite, tipping his hat and asking after her comfort, but there was a wariness about him that intrigued her. A week after her arrival, Daphne was hanging laundry in the yard when Isaac rode in, leading a beautiful black mare. "Miss Fletcher," he called, dismounting. "Thought you might like to start those riding lessons we discussed." Daphne glanced at the washing still to be hung. "I should finish my chores first." "Martha says you've been working since dawn," he replied. "She gave her blessing for you to take a break." Surprised and pleased, Daphne placed the last of the sheets on the line. "In that case, I'd be delighted, though I must warn you I have absolutely no experience with horses." "That's why we start with Daisy here," Isaac said, patting the black mare's neck. "Gentlest horse on the ranch. Used to belong to a preacher's wife over in Buena Vista." He showed her how to approach the horse, offering her palm flat with a piece of carrot. Daisy's soft lips tickled Daphne's hand as she took the treat, making her giggle. "She likes you," Isaac observed, a rare smile lightening his features. "That's a good start." The riding lesson was both terrifying and exhilarating for Daphne. Isaac was patient, showing her how to mount with the aid of a crate, as she was too short to reach the stirrup otherwise, how to hold the reins, and how to sit properly in the saddle. "Back straight, but not stiff," he instructed, his hand briefly touching the small of her back to correct her posture. Even through the fabric of her dress, his touch sent a surprising warmth through her. They stayed in the corral, with Isaac leading Daisy in slow circles as Daphne adjusted to the motion and gained confidence. "You're a natural," he said after an hour, as she successfully guided Daisy to turn left and right using the reins. "I think that's an exaggeration," Daphne laughed, "but I appreciate the encouragement." As he helped her dismount, his hands at her waist, their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement of growing ease in each other's company. "Thank you for the lesson, Isaac," she said, dropping her gaze first. "My pleasure, Miss Fletcher. Same time tomorrow if your chores allow. I'd like that very much." The riding lessons became a daily ritual, weather permitting. Under Isaac's tutelage, Daphne's confidence grew rapidly. By the end of her second week at Fletcher's Reach, she was riding Daisy around the ranch unescorted, though always within sight of the buildings as per her uncle's instructions. "Can't be too careful," Robert had said when she'd asked about exploring farther. "Been some trouble with rustlers lately, and occasionally we get drifters passing through who aren't the friendly sort." On a particularly fine morning in late June, Daphne was helping Martha shell peas on the front porch when they heard riders approaching. 3 men came into view, none of whom she recognized from the ranch hands. Martha's expression hardened. "Go inside and fetch your uncle," she said quietly. "Then stay inside until he calls for you." Alarmed by the older woman's tone, Daphne hurried to find Robert in his study, where he kept the ranch accounts. "Riders coming," she reported. Martha seemed concerned. Robert's face tightened. He opened a drawer and removed a revolver, checking it before tucking it into his belt at the small of his back, covered by his vest. "Stay in the house, Daphne," he said firmly, then strode out to the porch. Daphne, unable to contain her curiosity despite the warning, moved to the window where she could observe without being seen. The 3 men had dismounted by the time Robert reached the porch. They weren't dressed like the cowboys she'd become accustomed to seeing. Their clothes were finer, their manner more citified despite the dust of travel. "Fletcher," the leader greeted, a tall man with a neat mustache and expensive boots. "Been a while." "Not long enough, Hargrove," Robert replied, his tone cool. "What brings you to my property?" "Just being neighborly," Hargrove said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you had family arrive from back east. Thought I'd pay my respects." Daphne tensed. "How did this man know about her arrival?" "My niece is none of your concern," Robert said flatly. Hargrove's smile faltered. "Everything in this valley is my concern, Fletcher. You do well to remember that." He glanced around the ranch yard. "Nice operation you've built here. Be a shame if anything happened to it." The threat was thinly veiled, and Daphne saw her uncle's posture stiffen. "You've delivered your message," Robert said. "Now get off my land." Hargrove laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've got 1 month to reconsider my offer, Fletcher. After that, things might get difficult for you and your niece." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the tense standoff. Isaac rode into the yard, 2 ranch hands flanking him. His expression was stone as he assessed the situation, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Everything all right, Mr. Fletcher?" he asked, though his eyes never left Hargrove. "Just leaving," Robert replied. "Mr. Hargrove was just riding out." Hargrove's eyes narrowed as he studied Isaac. "Xavier," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Still playing cowboy, I see." "Still playing tyrant, I see," Isaac replied, his voice level but laced with contempt. Something like anger flashed across Hargrove's face before he controlled it. "1 month, Fletcher," he repeated, then mounted his horse. His companions followed suit, and the 3 men rode out, dust billowing behind them. Once they were out of sight, Daphne hurried outside. "Uncle Robert, who were those men? What did they want?" Robert sighed heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. "That was Edward Hargrove. Owns the biggest spread in the county, the Diamond H. Thinks that gives him the right to control everything and everyone in the valley. He's been trying to buy Fletcher's Reach for over a year," Isaac added, dismounting. "Your uncle's land controls access to the North water rights." Hargrove wants it. But this is your home, Daphne protested. Surely he can't force you to sell. A shadow crossed Robert's face. There are ways to make life difficult for those who stand in his way. Cattle that mysteriously disappear, fences that get cut, supplies that don't arrive from town. Is that what you and Isaac have been discussing in the evenings? The rustlers you mentioned, are they Hargrove's men? Robert nodded. We think so, but haven't caught them in the act. Without proof, there's little the sheriff can do. Hargrove has too much influence in the county. And what did he mean about me? How does he even know I'm here? News travels fast in small communities, Isaac explained. And Hargrove makes it his business to know everything happening in the valley. You don't need to worry, Robert assured her. We won't let any harm come to you. But as the men moved away to discuss security measures, Daphne couldn't shake the cold feeling Hargrove's visit had left. The peaceful refuge she had begun to find at Fletcher's Reach suddenly seemed more fragile than she had realized. That evening, after supper, Daphne found Isaac on the porch, smoking a cigarette as he gazed out at the darkening landscape. "May I join you?" she asked. He immediately stood, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his boot. "Of course, Miss Fletcher." She settled on the bench, smoothing her skirts. "I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Daphne when we're speaking privately." A brief smile touched his lips. "If you wish, Daphne." The way he said her name, with a slight hesitation as if testing its feel on his tongue, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "I wanted to ask you about Mr. Hargrove," she said, gathering her thoughts. "He seemed to know you." Isaac's expression hardened. "We've crossed paths before. There seemed to be some history between you." He was silent for a long moment, and Daphne thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "After the war, I worked as a lawman for a few years, deputy marshal in the New Mexico Territory. Hargrove was operating down there then, before he moved his operation to Colorado. He was running cattle, not all of them legally acquired." "You arrested him?" Isaac's mouth twisted in a grimace. "Tried to." "Had evidence he was rustling from small ranchers, selling the rebranded cattle to the army for a hefty profit. But Hargrove had friends in high places. Charges were dropped, and suddenly I found myself without a badge." "That's unjust," Daphne said, indignation coloring her voice. "That's the way of the world sometimes," Isaac replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide the bitterness beneath. "Power protects power. And now he wants Uncle Robert's land. Your uncle's land is valuable, good grazing, reliable water source, but I think for Hargrove, it's more than that now. It's about control. He can't stand that your uncle won't bend to his will." Daphne wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "What will happen when his 1-month ultimatum expires?" Isaac's expression grew serious. "Nothing good, but we're prepared. Your uncle's hired extra hands, and we're keeping watch round the clock. Is there really no law that can help? Sheriff Dawson's a good man, but he needs evidence before he can act against someone with Hargrove's influence. And Hargrove's careful uses men who can't be traced back to him for his dirty work." They sat in silence for a while, the chirping of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle from the nearby pasture the only sounds breaking the quiet night. "I should apologize," Isaac said eventually. "This isn't the peaceful welcome to the West you deserved." "You have nothing to apologize for," Daphne assured him. "You've been nothing but kind since the moment we met." Their eyes met in the dim light spilling from the house windows, and Daphne felt a now familiar warmth spreading through her. In the short time she'd known him, Isaac Xavier had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I should retire," she said softly, reluctant to end their conversation but aware of propriety. "Martha has promised to teach me how to make sourdough bread tomorrow, and apparently the process begins before dawn." Isaac stood as she rose, ever the gentleman despite his rough exterior. "Good night, Daphne," he said, her name a gentle caress in his deep voice. "Good night, Isaac." As she made her way to her room, Daphne found herself more troubled by Hargrove's threats than she had let on. The ranch had quickly become home, her uncle and Martha like family. And Isaac. Isaac was becoming something else entirely, something that made her heart beat faster when their eyes met. The thought of any harm coming to them or this place, because of a man's greed and pride, was intolerable. The following week brought increased tension to Fletcher's reach. Robert hired 3 additional hands, men Isaac vouched for personally. They established regular patrols of the property's boundaries and brought the cattle in closer to the ranch buildings, where they could be more easily guarded. Despite the undercurrent of anxiety, daily life continued. Daphne's riding skills improved to the point where Isaac deemed her ready for longer excursions. They began taking morning rides together, exploring the ranch's boundaries under the pretext of checking fences, but really allowing Daphne to experience the beauty of the Colorado wilderness. On one such ride, they stopped at a high meadow overlooking a winding creek, the mountains rising majestically beyond. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of colors, and butterflies danced among the blooms. "It's breathtaking," Daphne said, dismounting to better appreciate the view. Isaac helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "Thought you might like it. Your uncle brought me here my first week on the ranch. Said his brother, your father, always loved this spot when they were boys." Daphne was touched by the gesture. "Thank you for sharing it with me. I know so little about my father's childhood. He rarely spoke of his early years." "Your uncle mentioned they had a falling out when they were young men," Isaac said, leading the horses to a patch of grass where they could graze. "Never said what about, though." "My mother," Daphne said softly. "They both loved her, apparently. My father won her heart, and Uncle Robert left for the West soon after. They reconciled through letters in recent years, but never saw each other again before Father died." Isaac spread a blanket on the grass and they sat side by side, looking out over the valley. "Life's too short for grudges," he commented. "Your uncle learned that the hard way." "Is that wisdom from experience?" Daphne asked, studying his profile. A shadow crossed his features. "Perhaps. I've made my share of mistakes, held onto anger longer than was wise." Daphne hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since their conversation about Hargrove. "The war, was it very terrible for you?" Isaac was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, reflective. "I was 18 when I enlisted. Tennessee boy fighting for the Union made me popular, as you might imagine." His tone was dry. "Saw things no young man should see. Did things I still have nightmares about." He absently rubbed his left thigh, and Daphne remembered how he sometimes favored that leg when the weather changed. "Were you wounded, Shiloh?" "Minier ball to the leg. Not bad enough to send me home, just enough to leave me with a souvenir." Impulsively, Daphne placed her hand over his where it rested on the blanket. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." Isaac looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up, enfolding her smaller hand in his. "War changes a man, makes some better, some worse. I'm still figuring out which way it went for me." "I think I know," Daphne said softly. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day at the train station. Isaac's gaze dropped to her lips, and Daphne felt herself leaning toward him almost involuntarily. A distant gunshot shattered the moment. Isaac was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "That came from the direction of the ranch," he said, his expression grim. They mounted quickly, all thoughts of their near kiss forgotten in the rush of concern. Isaac led them down from the meadow at a pace that was fast but careful enough for Daphne's still developing riding skills. As they crested the rise that overlooked the ranch, they saw smoke rising from one of the outlying hay barns. "Damn," Isaac muttered. "Stay close to me, Daphne." They rode in to find Chaos Ranch hands rushing with buckets of water to douse the flames, cattle bellowing in the nearby corral, agitated by the smoke and commotion. Robert spotted them and hurried over, his face blackened with soot. "Thank God you're both all right." "When we couldn't find you, I feared." "What happened?" Isaac interrupted, dismounting and helping Daphne down. "Riders, 3 of them, set fire to the hay barn and shot at Jim when he tried to stop them. His fine bullet just grazed his arm." "Hargrove's men?" Isaac asked, his voice tight with anger. "Didn't recognize them, but who else would it be?" Robert wiped his brow, leaving a smear of ash. "They got away before we could catch them." Isaac's jaw clenched. "This is just the beginning. He's sending a message." "A message received," Robert said grimly. "But if he thinks this will make me sell, he doesn't know Fletcher's very well." Daphne looked between the 2 men, fear and determination warring within her. "What do we do now?" "We fight back," Isaac said simply. The next few weeks were a time of heightened vigilance at Fletcher's reach. The ranch hands worked in pairs, always armed. The cattle were brought in even closer to the main buildings, and someone was always on watch, day and night. Daphne insisted on taking her turn at watch duty, despite her uncle's initial protests. "I may be a woman, Uncle Robert, but I'm also a Fletcher," she had argued, "and I can learn to shoot as well as any man." Robert had relented, and Isaac had undertaken to teach her how to handle a rifle, a Winchester .44-40, that had belonged to her father. She proved to be a quick study and a surprisingly good shot once she overcame her initial fear of the weapon's recoil. "You're a natural," Isaac had commented after she hit 5 cans in a row at 50 paces. "You said the same about my riding," she reminded him with a smile. "I'm beginning to think you're an overly generous teacher. Or perhaps you're simply talented in ways you never had the opportunity to discover in Boston," he had replied, his eyes warm with admiration. The incident's continued: fences cut, a small group of cattle driven off one night, shots fired at ranch hands riding the boundaries. But thanks to their increased vigilance, the damage was contained, and no one was seriously hurt through it all. Daphne's feelings for Isaac deepened. They never spoke of the moment in the meadow, but something had changed between them. Their conversations grew more personal, their glances held longer, and occasionally, when they thought no one was watching, their hands would touch, fingers entwining briefly before propriety demanded they separate. Martha noticed, of course. Little escaped the housekeeper's sharp eyes. "That man's sweet on you," she commented one afternoon as she and Daphne kneaded bread dough in the kitchen. Daphne felt her cheeks flush. "I don't know what you mean," Martha snorted. "I wasn't born yesterday, girl. I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Like a man dying of thirst looks at water." "Isaac is simply being kind," Daphne protested weakly. "Isaac Xavier hasn't been simply kind to any woman in the 3 years I've known him," Martha replied, her hands never ceasing their rhythmic kneading. "Man keeps to himself, does his job, doesn't socialize beyond what's necessary. Then you arrive, and suddenly he's finding every excuse to be wherever you are." Daphne couldn't deny the truth in Martha's words. "Even if what you say is true, what could come of it? I've only been here a few weeks. We hardly know each other." "Sometimes a few weeks is all it takes," Martha said, her tone softening. "My late husband proposed to me after knowing me just 10 days. We had 42 good years together before his heart gave out." Daphne was saved from responding by the arrival of Robert, who entered the kitchen looking grave. "Sheriff Dawson just rode in," he announced. "Hargrove's men burned out the Wilkins place last night." "Dear God," Martha whispered, crossing herself. "Are they all right?" "Family's safe. They were in town when it happened, but they've lost everything. Sheriff says they're heading back east to stay with relatives." Daphne felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "The Wilkins farm is that the small place just north of here?" Robert nodded. "Tom Wilkins refused to sell to Hargrove last year. Looks like Hargrove decided to make an example of him." "The sheriff must do something now," Daphne insisted. "Surely this is proof of Hargrove's villainy." "No witnesses," Robert said grimly. "And the men who did it were strangers in these parts, hired guns, most likely, who have already moved on. Sheriff's hands are tied without evidence linking Hargrove directly to the crime." The implications were clear. Fletcher's reach could be next. That evening, Robert called a meeting of all the ranch hands. They gathered in the main room after supper, a dozen weathered men whose faces reflected the seriousness of the situation. "I won't lie to you boys," Robert began. "Things are likely to get worse before they get better. Hargrove's showing his hand now, and I expect we'll be next on his list. Anyone who wants to ride out, I understand. You'll get full wages plus a bonus for the trouble you've already faced." Not a single man moved toward the door. "We're with you, Mr. Fletcher," said Jim, the oldest of the hands, the one who had been grazed by a bullet during the hay barn incident. "Ain't none of us fancy working for a snake like Hargrove anyway." Murmurs of agreement circulated through the room. Isaac, standing by the fireplace, stepped forward. "We need to prepare for the possibility of a direct attack. Hargrove's getting bolder, and he's already shown he's willing to resort to violence." The men discussed strategies late into the night: how to fortify the ranch buildings, establish a rotation of guards, and create a system of signals in case of trouble. Daphne, sitting quietly beside Martha, listened and observed. These men, most of whom had been strangers to her a month ago, were now willing to risk their lives to defend her uncle's ranch, to defend her new home. It was humbling and terrifying all at once. As the meeting broke up, Isaac approached her. "You should consider going to town for a while," he said quietly. "Stay at the hotel until this is resolved." "I will not abandon my family," Daphne replied firmly. "This is my home now too, and I'll defend it alongside the rest of you." A complex mix of emotions crossed Isaac's face: pride, worry, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "You're a remarkable woman, Daphne Fletcher," he said finally. "Your uncle is lucky to have you, and you," she asked boldly. "Are you also lucky to have me?" The question hung between them, charged with all the unspoken feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. "More than you know," Isaac replied softly. He reached out, his fingertips just brushing her cheek in a touch so gentle it might have been imagined, then turned and walked away to join the men heading out to take the first watch. 3 days later, just as the ultimatum's deadline approached, a rider arrived at Fletcher's reach. It was Sheriff Dawson, his expression grim as he dismounted in the ranch yard. "Robert," he called, removing his hat as Daphne's uncle emerged from the barn. "Got some news you need to hear." The two men moved to the porch, where Daphne was helping Martha shell beans for that evening's supper. The women set aside their work as the men approached. "Ladies," the sheriff greeted, nodding respectfully. "Miss Fletcher, good to see you settling in." "What brings you out here, John?" Robert asked, getting straight to the point. Dawson sighed heavily. "Just got word from the territorial marshal. There's a warrant out for Isaac Xavier's arrest." Daphne felt her heart drop. "What? On what charges?" "Theft of cattle," Dawson replied, looking uncomfortable. Complaint filed by Edward Hargrove, claiming Xavier stole 20 head from Diamond H land 3 nights ago. That's absurd, Robert exploded. Isaac was right here 3 nights ago. We all were, preparing for Hargrove's men to make a move. I know that, and you know that, Dawson said placatingly. But Hargrove's got 3 witnesses who claim they saw Xavier driving Diamond H cattle across the North Ridge. Paid witnesses, no doubt, Martha muttered. Where is Isaac now? Dawson asked, ignoring the comment. Riding the east boundary with Pete and Charlie, Robert answered. They're not due back until sundown. I'd advise you to send for him, the sheriff said. Marshal Garrett's on his way from Denver. He'll be here by tomorrow morning to execute the warrant. Better if Isaac comes in voluntarily, shows he has nothing to hide. This is a setup, Daphne said, anger building within her. Hargrove is trying to remove Isaac because he knows he's the backbone of our defense. Dawson had the grace to look ashamed. I don't disagree, Miss Fletcher. But the law's the law and a warrant's a warrant. What will happen to him? She asked, fear replacing anger. He'll be held for trial. Given Hargrove's influence, bail is unlikely. And the trial, will it be fair? Robert demanded. Dawson's silence was answer enough. After the sheriff departed, having extracted a promise that Isaac would be at the ranch to surrender himself the following morning, Robert dispatched a hand to recall the foreman. We need to warn him, Daphne insisted. Give him a chance to get away. Robert's face was troubled. Running would only make him look guilty, and Isaac isn't the type of man to run from trouble. But if the trial won't be fair, we'll find a way to help him, Robert assured her. I've got some savings. We'll hire the best lawyer in Denver. But Daphne couldn't shake the sick feeling in her stomach. She had seen how power worked in Boston society. She had no illusions about the justice a man like Isaac might receive when pitted against someone of Hargrove's wealth and influence. When Isaac returned at dusk and was told of the warrant, his reaction was characteristically calm. It was bound to happen, he said, sitting at the kitchen table as Martha placed a cup of coffee before him. Hargrove's getting desperate if he's resorting to this. You can't surrender to the marshal, Daphne argued, pacing the kitchen. It's a trap. Once you're in custody, Hargrove's men will be free to attack the ranch. And if I run, I'll look guilty, Isaac countered. Plus, they'll just send men after me, taking resources away from defending Fletcher's reach. There must be another way, she insisted. Isaac's eyes followed her movements, his expression softening. Daphne, sit down, please. She complied reluctantly, taking the chair across from him. I've faced worse odds, he said quietly, and I'm innocent. The truth has a way of coming out. Not when the deck is stacked against it, she replied bitterly. Robert, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly straightened. Maybe not as stacked as Hargrove thinks, he said slowly. John mentioned that Hargrove claims the cattle were stolen 3 nights ago, driven across the North Ridge. What are you thinking? Isaac asked, recognizing the calculating look in his employer's eye. 3 nights ago was when we had that thunderstorm. Remember how we were worried about lightning strikes starting fires? Isaac nodded, understanding dawning. And Pete was stationed at the north lookout all night, keeping watch. With that new camera of his, Robert confirmed. He was hoping to catch lightning striking the mountains, said it would make a fine photograph. If he was photographing the North Ridge that night, Daphne began, hope rising. Then he might have evidence that no cattle drive occurred, Isaac finished, and proof of where I was. Robert was already heading for the door. I'll find Pete. He's been developing those plates in the old storage shed he converted to a darkroom. Left alone with Isaac, Daphne reached across the table to grasp his hand. I can't bear the thought of them taking you away, she confessed, her voice breaking. Isaac turned his hand to clasp hers. I meant what I said before. The truth will come out. And if it doesn't, his blue eyes held hers steadily, then I'll find my way back to you. That's a promise. The raw emotion in his voice left no doubt about his feelings. Daphne felt tears welling in her eyes. Isaac, the kitchen door burst open as Robert returned, excitement written across his features. Pete has them. 4 plates showing the North Ridge, taken from midnight to dawn. Not a single cow or rider visible. Relief flooded through Daphne, but Isaac remained cautious. It's good evidence, but will it be enough? Hargrove could claim the cattle were moved before or after the photographs were taken. That's why this is even better, Robert said, producing a small leather-bound book. Pete's logbook. He records the time, date, and conditions for every photograph he takes. And look here. He opened the book to a marked page. Notes about you and Jim bringing him coffee at 2 in the morning, commenting on the storm. That puts you here, not driving cattle. A glimmer of hope appeared in Isaac's eyes. It might work. I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow, Robert said. Meet the marshal before he comes out here. Show him the evidence. John will back us up. He knows Pete's reputation as a photographer. For the first time since hearing about the warrant, Daphne allowed herself to believe that Isaac might escape Hargrove's trap, but their relief was short-lived. Shortly after dawn the next morning, a ranch hand burst into the house, his face pale with alarm. Riders coming. At least 15 men armed to the teeth. Robert grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. Get everyone to their positions. Isaac, get Daphne and Martha to the root cellar. I can fight, Daphne protested, already reaching for the Winchester that had become her constant companion. Not this time, Robert said firmly. If this goes badly, I need to know you're safe. Isaac gently but firmly took her arm. He's right, come on. Martha was already gathering supplies, water, blankets, and a lantern. This way, she directed, leading them to a trapdoor in the kitchen floor that Daphne had never noticed before. I should be up there with them, Isaac said, his expression tormented as he helped the women into the earthen cellar beneath the house. They're coming because of me. They're coming because Hargrove wants this land, Robert said from the kitchen doorway, and he's tired of waiting. The warrant was just a ploy to get you out of the way. He tossed a pistol to Isaac. If they get past us, you protect the women. With that, he was gone, the trapdoor closing behind him. The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Martha lit the lantern, casting a warm glow over their worried faces. I should be up there, Isaac repeated, his hand flexing around the pistol's grip. You'd only be playing into Hargrove's hands, Daphne reasoned, though it took all her willpower not to agree with him. If the marshal arrives and finds you engaged in a gun battle, no amount of evidence will save you. The sounds of the battle above filtered down to them, shouted commands, the crack of rifles, and occasionally, more ominously, the splintering of wood as bullets found their mark in the ranch house. Daphne paced the small space, counting the shots, trying to gauge how many defenders were still fighting. Isaac stood at the bottom of the ladder, muscles tense, ready to defend the entrance should anyone discover it. They're pulling back, he said suddenly, his head tilted toward the trapdoor. The shootings moved farther away. Before Daphne could respond, they heard heavy footsteps directly above them. Someone was in the kitchen. They held their breath, hands tightening on their weapons. The trapdoor creaked, then slowly lifted. Isaac, you down there, came Robert's voice. We're here, Isaac confirmed, lowering his pistol. What's happening? Hargrove's men are retreating. Marshall showed up with a posse from town, caught them in the act of attacking a civilian ranch. Sheriff Dawson's with them. Relief flooded through Daphne as they climbed out of the root cellar. The kitchen was a mess, broken dishes, overturned furniture, and a few bullet holes in the walls, but the damage seemed superficial. Outside, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Several of Hargrove's men were being held at gunpoint by the marshal's posse. Others were being tended for wounds by the town doctor, who had accompanied the lawman. A few bodies lay covered with blankets. Men who would never ride again. Marshal Garrett, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, was questioning Sheriff Dawson when they approached. "Mr. Xavier," Garrett acknowledged, his sharp eyes taking in Isaac's appearance. "I understand there's a matter of a warrant we need to discuss." "Marshal, I have evidence that Mr. Xavier was nowhere near the location of the alleged cattle theft," Robert began, but Garrett held up a hand. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Fletcher. One of Mr. Hargrove's men has already confessed that the accusation was fabricated on his employer's orders. Seems he had a crisis of conscience when he realized how many men might die today for a lie." Daphne felt a wave of relief so intense her knees nearly buckled. Isaac steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his own relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "And Hargrove?" Isaac asked. "Was he among the attackers?" Garrett's expression hardened. "No. Men like Hargrove rarely dirty their own hands, but his foreman confirmed he ordered the attack. We'll be paying Mr. Hargrove a visit as soon as we've secured these prisoners." "I'm riding with you," Sheriff Dawson declared. "Time I started earning my badge again." As the lawmen organized their prisoners for the ride back to town, Robert surveyed the damage to his ranch. A window broken here, a fence post splintered there, but miraculously, none of the ranch hands had been seriously injured. One of the attackers had not been so fortunate. He lay dead near the corral, his unseeing eyes staring at the Colorado sky. "Could have been much worse," Robert commented. "Thanks to the marshal's timely arrival," Isaac agreed. Daphne, standing beside them, shook her head. "Thanks to all of you defending your home," she corrected. "If you hadn't held them off, the marshal would have arrived too late." As the excitement died down and the marshal's posse departed with their prisoners, a sense of cautious optimism settled over Fletcher's reach. Hargrove would face justice for his actions, perhaps not as severe as he deserved, given his connections, but enough to ensure he wouldn't threaten them again anytime soon. That evening, as Daphne helped Martha prepare a simple supper, the planned stew having been a casualty of the bullet that shattered its pot, she felt a curious lightness. The danger wasn't entirely past, but for the first time since Hargrove's men had started their campaign of intimidation, she could envision a future at Fletcher's reach, without the shadow of threat hanging over them. After the meal, as the men dispersed to tend to evening chores and set the night watch, a precaution that would continue for some time yet, Daphne found herself drawn to the porch. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the mountains standing in dark silhouette against the fading light. She wasn't surprised when Isaac joined her, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "Beautiful evening," he commented. "It is," she agreed. "Everything looks so peaceful now, as if this morning never happened." "That's one of the things I love about this country," Isaac said. "No matter what man does, the land endures. The sun rises and sets, the seasons change, life goes on." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Isaac said finally, his voice low and serious. "About what happens next." Daphne turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That life's too short and too uncertain to waste time on fear and hesitation." He straightened, turning to face her fully. "When I thought I might be taken away today, my greatest regret was all the things I hadn't said to you." "What things?" Daphne asked softly, though she hoped she knew the answer. Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. That from the moment I saw you at that train station, something in me recognized something in you. That every day since then, I've found myself looking for excuses to be near you. That I've never met a woman with your courage, your determination, your heart. He took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I know it's too soon, he continued. We've known each other barely 2 months. You're still adjusting to life here, and I have little to offer beyond myself and whatever future we might build together. But I need you to know that I love you, Daphne Fletcher, with everything that I am. Tears welled in Daphne's eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. It's not too soon, she whispered. Not when every day has felt like a lifetime of getting to know you. Not when I've felt more alive in these 2 months than in all my years before. She stepped closer still, tilting her face up to his. I love you too, Isaac. I think I have since you said I'm here now when I needed someone most. His smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. One hand released hers to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. May I kiss you, Daphne Fletcher? He asked, his voice husky with emotion. Please, she breathed. His lips met hers with exquisite tenderness, a first kiss that spoke of reverence and promise, of passion carefully controlled. Daphne's hands found their way to his shoulders, then slid around his neck as the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest about the desire that had been building between them. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, he said. Court you openly with your uncle's blessing, build something real and lasting with you. I want that too, Daphne assured him. And I think Uncle Robert already knows how we feel. Martha certainly does. A low chuckle rumbled through Isaac's chest. Not much escapes Martha's notice. Or my uncle's, came Robert's voice from the doorway, startling them both. They turned to find him watching them with an expression that mingled amusement and affection. Sir, Isaac began, but Robert waved him off. No need for explanations, Isaac. I've seen this coming since the day you brought her home from the station. He stepped onto the porch, his expression growing more serious. My brother would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and courage above all else. I would like your blessing, sir, Isaac said formally. To court your niece with the intention of asking for her hand when she's ready. Robert looked between them, noting their clasped hands and the happiness shining in both their faces. You have it, he said simply. Life's too short for anything less than love, as I learned the hard way. Daphne moved to embrace her uncle. Thank you, she whispered. Be happy, child, he replied. That's all the thanks I need. He cleared his throat, suddenly gruff with emotion. Now I believe I'll turn in early, been a long day. With a nod to Isaac and a wink for Daphne, he retreated into the house. Left alone again, Isaac pulled Daphne into his arms. I never expected to find you, he murmured against her hair. Never thought I deserved this kind of happiness. Why wouldn't you deserve happiness? She asked, drawing back to look up at him. A shadow crossed his face. The war. The things I did afterward as a lawman. I've taken lives, Daphne, made choices I'm not proud of. We all have regrets, she said softly. What matters is who you choose to be now and who you strive to become. You make me want to be a better man, he said simply. You already are the best of men, she assured him, rising on tiptoe to place a gentle kiss on his lips. Brave enough to fight when necessary, but gentle enough to teach a city girl to ride and shoot. Strong enough to face danger, but vulnerable enough to admit your feelings. They stood together on the porch as full night descended, the vast canopy of stars spreading above them like a blessing. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another farther away. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night, a horse nickering in the stable, the creak of the windmill turning in the light breeze, created a symphony of home that Daphne knew she would never tire of. "What happens now?" she asked eventually, content in the circle of Isaac's arms but curious about their future. "Whatever we want," he replied. "With Hargrove facing charges, the ranch will be secure again. Your uncle mentioned expanding the herd next spring. I've been saving most of my wages, thought about buying a small spread of my own someday, but now." "Now," she prompted when he hesitated. "Now I'm thinking about a future that includes you. A home we build together, children we raise to love this land as we do." The vision he painted made Daphne's heart swell with hope and longing. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." "It won't always be easy," he cautioned. "Ranch life has its hardships and Colorado winters can be brutal." "I'm stronger than I look," she reminded him. "And I've already learned so much. By next winter, I'll be as hardy as any Western woman." His low laugh vibrated through her as he held her closer. "I believe you will. You're a remarkable woman, Daphne Fletcher. Soon to be Daphne Xavier, perhaps," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. The look of pure joy that spread across Isaac's face was answer enough, but he put it into words anyway. "Nothing would make me happier," he said, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of all the tomorrows waiting for them. 3 months later, on a crisp October day with the aspen trees blazing gold against the evergreen backdrop of the mountains, Daphne Fletcher became Daphne Xavier in a ceremony held in the meadow where they had nearly shared their first kiss. Sheriff Dawson, newly appointed as a justice of the peace, officiated, with Robert giving the bride away, and Martha shedding uncharacteristic tears from the front row of assembled guests. The ranch hands had constructed an arbor of twisted branches, adorned with late-blooming wildflowers and ribbon. Daphne wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Martha had helped her remake from one of her Boston gowns, with touches of lace that had once belonged to her mother. Isaac, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited for her beneath the arbor, his face radiating a happiness that matched her own. As she walked toward him on Robert's arm, Daphne reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The lonely, frightened young woman who had sat crying at the Salida train station seemed like a stranger now, someone she had once been but had outgrown, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. "Beautiful," Isaac murmured as she reached him, taking her hands in his. "Dearly beloved," Sheriff Dawson began, his usual gruff manner softened for the occasion. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged the vows they had written together, promises not just of love and fidelity, but of partnership, of building a life that honored the land and each other, of creating a home where love would always find welcome. When they were pronounced husband and wife, and Isaac kissed her with a tenderness that belied the passion she knew they would share later in private, Daphne felt a sense of rightness, of completion. This was where she belonged in this wild, beautiful country with this good, honorable man. The celebration afterward was joyous, a feast prepared by Martha and the women from neighboring ranches, music provided by a fiddler and guitarist from town, dancing that continued well into the evening by the light of bonfires and lanterns hung from the trees. As twilight deepened into night, Isaac led Daphne away from the festivities, toward the small cabin they would call their own. Robert had given them a parcel of land on the eastern edge of the ranch as a wedding gift, and the men had worked tirelessly to build the cabin in time for the wedding. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Isaac said as they reached the porch of their new dwelling. Before she could respond, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. The cabin was simple but comfortable, one large room with a stone fireplace, a curtained-off sleeping area, and windows that would catch the morning sun. Someone Martha, Daphne suspected, had been there ahead of them, lighting the fire and lamps, turning down the bed, and leaving a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the small table. "What do you think?" Isaac asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as he set her gently on her feet. "It's not much yet, but we can add to it as time goes on." Daphne turned in a slow circle, taking in the home they would share. The furniture was handcrafted but solid, the curtains and quilts made by her own hands with Martha's guidance. On the mantel stood a photograph in a silver frame, a wedding gift from Pete, showing Isaac and Daphne on horseback against the backdrop of the mountains. "It's perfect," she said sincerely, turning back to her husband. "Everything I could have wished for." The relief and pleasure in his expression warmed her heart. "We'll have a good life here," he promised, drawing her into his arms. "Not always an easy one, but a good one." "The best kind of life," she agreed, resting her head against his chest, hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart. "One we build together." As the fire crackled in the hearth, and the sounds of celebration drifted faintly from the direction of the main ranch, Isaac bent to kiss her with a passion no longer restrained by propriety or circumstance. Daphne responded in kind, her body and heart finally free to express the love that had grown between them. Later, much later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt she had made for their marriage bed, Daphne reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The train ride west that had seemed like an ending had proven to be the beginning of everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About beginnings and endings," she replied truthfully. "And how sometimes they are the same thing." He propped himself up on one elbow, gazing down at her with eyes that reflected the firelight. "Deep thoughts for a wedding night," he teased gently. "I was just thinking how frightened I was that day at the train station," she explained. "How alone I felt. And then you appeared and said, 'I'm here now,'" he finished for her. "Little did I know those 3 words would change my life forever." "They changed mine too," Daphne said softly, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "I think I started falling in love with you in that moment, though I didn't recognize it then." Isaac caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I knew something had happened to me," he admitted. "Couldn't put a name to it, but I felt it like something clicking into place that had been misaligned my whole life." "Poetic for a cowboy," she teased, echoing his earlier tone. "You inspire poetry in me," he replied, his voice dropping to a husky whisper as he bent to kiss her again. "And other things." Later still, as Isaac slept beside her, Daphne slipped from bed and moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain to gaze out at the night. The moon hung full and bright in the clear Colorado sky, illuminating the landscape in silver light. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel, eternal and unchanging despite the small dramas of human lives played out beneath them. She thought of all that had happened since that day at the train station, the tears of abandonment, the unexpected rescue, the gradual blooming of love amid danger and uncertainty. She thought of the future that stretched before them, now the ranch they would build together, the children they hoped to have, the life they would forge in this wild, beautiful land. As if sensing her absence, Isaac stirred. "Daphne," he called softly, his voice rough with sleep. She turned from the window, her heart full. "I'm here," she replied, moving back to him, back to the warmth and security of his embrace. "I'm here now," she whispered as she settled beside him, completing the circle that had begun that day at the Salida train station. "And I always will be." Epilogue. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on Fletcher's Reach. as Daphne Xavier stood on the porch of the expanded cabin she shared with Isaac, shading her eyes against the glare as she watched the approaching riders. Her 3-year-old son, Robert James Xavier, played at her feet with wooden horses his father had carved for him, while baby Margaret slept peacefully in the cradle beside her, just 4 months old and already showing signs of her mother's determination. "Papa!" RJ shouted, abandoning his toys to race down the steps as he recognized the lead rider. Isaac dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping his son up into his arms with a laugh. "Have you been good for your mama while I was gone?" he asked, settling the boy on his hip as he approached the porch. "Yes, sir," RJ replied solemnly. "I helped with the chickens and didn't pull Maggie's toes even once." "That's my boy," Isaac approved, his free arm reaching for Daphne as he mounted the steps. She went willingly into his embrace, savoring the familiar scent and feel of him after 5 days apart. "Welcome home," she murmured against his chest. "Best part of leaving is coming back to you," he replied, dropping a kiss on the top of her head before turning his attention to the sleeping infant. "And how's my little lady? Growing every day," Daphne said proudly. "She rolled over yesterday, all on her own." Isaac's face lit up with the simple joy of a father hearing of his child's milestone. "That's my girl," he said softly, gently touching the baby's cheek with one finger. Turning to the second rider who had just dismounted, Daphne called, "Uncle Robert. Come in and have some lemonade. You must be parched after the ride." Robert Fletcher, his beard now fully gray but his step still vigorous, climbed the porch steps with a grin. "Don't mind if I do. That Denver sun's fierce in July." As the men washed up and settled at the kitchen table, Daphne served cold lemonade and slices of the apple pie she'd baked that morning. RJ clambered onto his father's lap, eager to tell him about the fawn he'd spotted near the creek and the new kittens in the barn. "The cattle fetch a good price?" Daphne asked once the initial flurry of homecoming had settled. "Better than we hoped," Robert confirmed. "Those new Herefords are paying off, and that railroad contract Isaac negotiated means we're guaranteed buyers for the next 3 years. "You negotiated that contract," Isaac corrected. "I just stood there looking intimidating while you charmed the railroad men." Robert laughed. "Team effort, then. The Xavier Fletcher brand is making quite a name for itself in Colorado." He took a long drink of lemonade, then set the glass down with a satisfied sigh. "Which reminds me, I've been thinking it might be time for me to step back a bit. Let you young folks take over more of the running of things." "Uncle Robert, you're hardly in your dotage," Daphne protested. "You outwork men half your age." "Not saying I'm ready for the rocking chair," Robert clarified. "Just thinking it might be nice to have more time for fishing. Maybe take that trip back east I've been talking about for years." "To see Father's grave?" Daphne asked softly. Robert nodded. "And to make peace with some old ghosts." "Should have done it years ago." He glanced at Isaac and the children. "Your happiness reminded me that life's too short for holding on to old hurts." After Robert departed for the main house, Daphne and Isaac settled on the porch swing with Maggie cradled in her mother's arms and RJ playing nearby with his wooden menagerie. "5 days is too long to be away," Isaac commented, his arm around Daphne's shoulders. "It seemed longer this time," she agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. "The children missed you terribly, as did I." "I've been thinking," he said, his voice taking on the tone that told her he was about to propose something significant. "With the railroad contract secured and the ranch doing well, maybe it's time we took a trip of our own." Daphne looked up at him, surprised. "A trip? Where to?" "I was thinking Boston." He smiled at her astonishment. "You've told me so much about it over the years." "I'd like to see where you grew up, meet your old friends, And I think it's important for the children to know that part of their heritage too. Emotion welled up in Daphne's throat. Though she had never regretted her decision to make her life in Colorado, there were times when she missed the familiar streets and sounds of her childhood home. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "And I think your uncle's right about stepping back. Not entirely, but enough to enjoy what we've built. The children are growing so fast I don't want to miss any of it because I'm always out checking fence lines or driving cattle to market." "You're a wonderful father," Daphne assured him. "The children adore you, and their mother." "What does she think of me?" he asked, a teasing light in his blue eyes that had become no less captivating with the passing years. "She thinks you're tolerable enough," Daphne replied primly, then broke into a smile at his mock offended expression. "She loves you more with each passing day, if you must know. Though she can't imagine how that's possible, since she thought she loved you completely from the start." The tender look that came over Isaac's face still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. "I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory," he said softly. "And I'm the luckiest woman," she replied, "to have found you when I needed you most." As the evening shadows lengthened across their land, Daphne reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. The frightened, weeping girl at the Salida train station had found not just a rescuer that day, but a future filled with love, purpose, and belonging. In Isaac's simple words, "I'm here now," she had found everything she never knew she was seeking. And in the life they had built together at Fletcher's Reach, she had discovered the true meaning of home,